Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Pope Francis is coming to Canada next week to apologize for the abuses committed at Catholic-run residential schools. APTN's Tina House takes a look at how survivors are feeling about this visit and asks if it will help heal those deep wounds from the past.
When the Indigenous delegation traveled to Rome, Italy in late March of this year, hopes were high that by telling Pope Francis about the attempted genocide of Indigenous people in Canada, it would allow for the next step of healing to begin.
I'm very, very encouraged by the audience we had today, going forward into our relationship, a new relationship.
And for 85-year-old Angie Crier from Grand Prairie, Alberta, she was able to tell him her story about being a survivor.
And one thing we have now is our pride. They did not break us. We're still here, and we intend to live here forever.
And after 3 days of private audiences between the Pope and the Métis, First Nations and Inuit delegation, Pope Francis addressed the general audience on the final day.
Listening to your voices, I was able to enter into and be deeply grieved by the stories of the suffering, hardship, discrimination, and various forms of abuse that some of you experienced, particularly in the residential schools. It's chilling.
But no one suspected these meetings would end with these long-awaited words.
For the deplorable conduct of these members of the Catholic Church,
E vorrei dirvi di tutto cuore, sono molto addolorato. E mi unisco ai fratelli vescovi canadesi.
I ask for God's forgiveness, and I want to say to you with all my heart, I am very sorry.
Former National Chief Phil Fontaine has traveled to Rome before to meet with the previous Pope, but says, like many others, he was taken by surprise at the apology.
In my case, I didn't think he would say, "I am sorry." I didn't think I would hear him say how he felt shame for and guilt for what the church did to our people, and that he was prepared to come to Canada.
And now with his plane expected to land in Canada on July the 24th, Pope Francis is expected to formally apologize to residential school survivors and their families. This will be the first time ever that the highest rank within the Catholic Church has ever accepted responsibility for the crimes committed against Indigenous children that were put into those schools and terribly abused. Ralph Leon is now chief of his community, but at the age of 10 was forced to attend residential school just outside of Mission, BC.
I haven't come back here because of what's still in my mind, what I witnessed here. The mental abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse that I witnessed here.
Chief Leon says the church must do more to address what is continuing to happen to Indigenous people.
But there needs to be a plan, a recovery plan for our people. Like I said, we're like a broken people still. This is only one residential school. There's still the scoop, foster care, day school, all those things. And it started where?
And with preparations well underway for the visit from the Pope, which starts in Edmonton, Alberta, Tony Belcourt, who's originally from Lac St. Anne, says he has concerns over what will happen in his home community during the annual pilgrimage.
That for a long time, the people in the community have been trying to get the church to turn over records of our graves. We have an unmarked grave site. There was a cairn put up there by our people a long time ago, but it doesn't cover the full footprint of the gravesite itself. So, and that footprint goes right out to where this new paved road is. So a horrible thought I have in my head is, thousands of people standing on our unmarked graves right beside that paved road so they can wave to the Pope when he goes by.
For other survivors like Geraldine Shingoose from Manitoba, she says she isn't quite sure how well this visit will be received from other survivors in Canada.
That the whole intent of this visit, I see it as a photo op, and as a, it doesn't come across truthful.
Shingoose says that although Pope Francis made no mention of the suspected unmarked graves of children that were buried near residential schools, she is hopeful that this visit will help bring more of the truth of what really happened.
And in that walking together, they're saying there's reconciliation and healing that they want to bring, or we can't have that without that truth.
For Cassidy Karen, she says there could have been more done to include the voices of survivors in the planning.
There have been challenges along the way. There has been unclear processes. There has been unclear authorities and decision making throughout the entire process. And once again, we could have had more input. We could have, been able to bring survivors to the table to guide this process. The opportunities, though, just haven't been there to the extent that we had hoped.
For years, there were stories about the horrors that took place behind closed doors. Stories of horrific abuse suffered by survivors that were told over and over again, but no one seemed to listen. And those traumas were then buried, eventually manifesting into a lifetime of sadness, addiction, and chaos. For the thousands of children that made it out alive, that pain also reverberated into intergenerational trauma as they grew up and had families of their own. In many cases, this caused further dysfunction as the trauma from residential schools never fully healed. It's expected that Pope Francis will offer his first official apology to residential school survivors and their families on July the 25th. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
All right, thanks for that, Tina. We'll have more news coming up after a short break. Welcome back to APTN National News. Gone are the masks, vaccination requirements, and capacity limits, as most provinces and territories have lifted COVID-19 restrictions. But as APTN's Fraser Needham reports, the virus is still out there, and all Canadians, including Indigenous communities, need to continue to take precautions.
Since the spring, there has been very little public messaging about COVID. Even though the vaccines are much less effective in preventing transmission of the Omicron variant, Toronto Dr. Isaac Bogosh says this should not stop people from getting a third or even fourth shot.
Again, these vaccines are phenomenal, and they really stand up and hold up even through time in terms of protecting people against severe illness, such as hospitalization and death. I mean, they do such a remarkable job in lowering the risk.
But the numbers show only a minority of Canadians are getting third and fourth shots, and First Nations are no different. According to the Indigenous Services Canada website, only 38% of those 12 and older have received a third dose, compared to 89% who got the second one. ISC Chief Medical Officer Thomas Wong says this drops to about 10% for the fourth dose. He says First Nations communities need to continue to be cautious.
So what can we all do in order to actually protect ourselves, protect the elders, protect pregnant women, protect children, protect those who are most vulnerable in the communities? There are already existing tools that can be used, and one of them, is masking up.
Bogosh says with almost no COVID restrictions in the provinces and territories, regular public messaging is now more essential than ever, and the federal government should be leading the way.
Really sound public health messaging. We're obviously in an era where there's very few public health mitigation efforts in place, right? You don't need to wear a mask if you don't want to. Most of the country, most measures have been lifted. There's no capacity limits. And I think it would go a long way if we had strong coordinated messaging as well, saying like, here is how you protect yourself and those around you.
Dr. Wong says the government is meeting with individual Indigenous communities to talk about COVID, but adds,
one of the things that we are hearing from different partners is that people are a bit tired, about COVID, just the fatigue, setting in, and it's helpful, to be putting the minds on something else.
Wong says the government will likely resume a more regular schedule of COVID media updates in the fall. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A Thunder Bay police officer has been found guilty of neglect of duty and discreditable conduct for his role in the death investigation of Stacy Debungee. Debungee was found in the McIntyre River in October of 2015. Thunder Bay police quickly ruled the death as not suspicious in nature. Debungee's brother Brad, along with former chief of the Rainy River First Nation, filed complaints. For more, we're joined by their lawyer, Asha James. Ms. James, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, one of the Thunder Bay police officers has been acquitted on the charges they faced, but Staff Sergeant Sean Harrison has been found guilty of neglect of duty and discreditable conduct. How is Brad Debungee feeling about this?
I spoke with Brad yesterday, and his feeling was finally some accountability. That's what this journey has always been about for the family. Has been about accountability, and so I don't want to use the word relieved, but I think the family was they're pleased that there's been some accountability into how this investigation was handled.
Now, can you tell us what role racism played in the investigation into Stacy's death and this ruling as well?
Yeah, and so what the tribunal found was that Staff Sergeant Harrison made up his mind as soon as they pulled Stacy out of the river about how he got into the river, and that kind of a theory of the case was in part due to a reliance on these racial stereotypes that Stacy was an Indigenous man. They had interactions with the police before in terms of Liquor License Act violations. And so, he must have been drunk this time and he just rolled into the river. And I think the evidence that came out of the tribunal was that relying on that theory really infected the rest of the way that they conducted the investigation, and their failure to follow up on witnesses, and speak to the private investigator, I'd say was really tied to that decision that they made as soon as they pulled Stacy out of the water.
Now, another hearing is scheduled for September. Can you tell us what is expected there and what sort of punishment Sergeant Harrison could be facing?
Yeah, so September is going to be a hearing about exactly that. What's the appropriate sentence for Staff Sergeant Harrison. And the Police Service Act has a range of sentencing. It can go from, the relinquishing of some banked time that the officer may have, up to a termination of employment. And so, I'm not sure what position all of the parties are going to be taking. We're going to be spending some time really reviewing the decision and the factual findings of the hearing officer. But the family is definitely of the opinion that whatever the discipline, the punishment is for Staff Sergeant Harrison, it needs to be on the high end to really set a message that this type of conduct is not acceptable, and that it won't be tolerated. It really sours the reputation of the Thunder Bay Police Service, and so we're hopeful, and that's what we'll be looking for is to ensure that whatever the sentencing is, it really sends a message. Not only is it punishment for Sergeant Harrison, but it informs other officers that this kind of conduct is not tolerable.
All right, and lastly here, this has been dragging out for 7 years, but Brad Debungee's complaint led to the broken trust report. This police hearing, the OPP are currently reinvestigating Stacy's death. Can you just talk about the importance of Brad launching his complaints?
I think the importance of Brad launching the complaint is that it finally really turned a microscope on the Thunder Bay Police Service. And I think one of the really important things is that it's really helped validate the experience of a lot of Indigenous people in Thunder Bay, of what they've said their experience has been like with the Thunder Bay Police. And that's been validated through the broken trust. And it's been validated by this decision that yes, this is conduct that does take place, and this is not something that has been blown out of proportion, or that Indigenous people in Thunder Bay have over exaggerated, that their experience is real, that it matters, and that we're now going to be holding the police service and these officers to account for that conduct and that behavior.
All right, Ms. James, we'll have to leave it there, but we certainly appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day today to speak with us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and thanks again for having me. Miigwech.
All right, we need to step aside one final time. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. This comes to us from Patty Sinclair. Patty captured the beautiful deep blue sky in the early evening over the community of Penamutang First Nation in Manitoba. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We start in the east, 29 in a mix of sun and cloud in Charlottetown and 30 in Halifax. 22 degrees in Happy Valley Goose Bay and 16 and some rain in Cartwright. 22 and rain in Val-d'Or and 29 in Montreal. 31 in Windsor and 23 in Sault Ste. Marie. 25 degrees in Sioux Lookout and some rain in 22 in Big Trout Lake. Rain in 8 in Churchill and rain in 21 in Norway House. 24 and some rain in Barons River and 28 in Winnipeg. A mix of sun and cloud and 28 in Regina and 27 in North Battleford. 26 and rain in Meadow Lake and 14 in Stony Rapids. Moving over to the west, some rain and 20 in Fort Chipewyan and 23 in rain in Peace River. Mix of sun and cloud and 26 in Edmonton and sunshine and 32 in Lethbridge. 23 in Vancouver and 26 in rain in Bella Coola. Some showers and 16 in Sandspit and 21 in rain in Fort Nelson. 21 degrees in Whitehorse and 18 in Rock River. 25 and some showers in Fort Liard and 23 in Norman Wells. Some showers and 23 in Fort McPherson and 20 in Colville Lake. 13 degrees in Cambridge Bay and 19 in Baker Lake. 8 degrees in Arctic Bay and a mix of sun and cloud and 11 in Iqaluit. Next week, Ottawa will host the Ontario Indigenous Summer Games, and Indigenous athletes from across the province are excited for them to return, especially since the last ones were cancelled due to the pandemic. APTN's Annette Francis caught up with some basketball players from Tyendinaga Mohawk territory who can't wait to participate.
Marley Miracle and her Gindage Wolves teammates are trying to up their game when it comes to shooting hoops.
And then when you come up, you want to be straight up all the way through.
Miracle's looking forward to representing her community and competing with friends.
I haven't played with these girls in about 4 or 5 years, and it's nice getting back together, like finding our rhythm again, and yeah, it's nice.
She is one of 36 youth and 4 teams from Tyendinaga that have been practicing since June. Coach James McCourt looks forward to the competition.
They work really hard. They're a really great group of kids. We're having a lot of fun with them. One of the neat things about the Summer Games is that it's also a NAG qualifier. So, some of these kids are hoping to maybe get looked at for the North American Indigenous Games in Halifax next summer.
According to the Ontario Games organizers, there are 18 teams and over 200 athletes registered for all 5 sporting events. Dominic Miracle and Tristan McWilliams are hyped for it. They're hoping to make it to the North American Indigenous Games scheduled for Halifax next year.
I don't know, I really love basketball my whole life. I've always been playing, so getting an opportunity like this has been amazing.
The opening ceremonies for the Summer Games will be held next Thursday in Ottawa, which means the Gindage Wolves will have just 2 more practices before the big event. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Tyendinaga.
Tall Paul is an Indigenous hip-hop artist and inspirational speaker. His new album is named after Olympian Jim Thorpe, who was just reinstated as a gold medalist. He joins us to speak about Thorpe and what the news means to him. Tall Paul, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We'll start off with, what was your reaction to Jim Thorpe being reinstated as the sole gold medalist in the pentathlon and decathlon of the 1912 Olympics?
I was extremely happy, and it made me feel good to know that he was finally recognized as he should be as the sole gold medalist. And then as I thought about it a little bit more, it seems like, the least they could do at the same time, but I was definitely glad, and it's cause for celebration.
Well, and tell us about your upcoming album release, and tell us why you labeled the album The Story of Jim Thorpe.
Yeah, so Jim Thorpe inspired me as a young Native athlete. He made me believe in myself just as a young man in general. It made me a better artist in person. He was a very inspiring story to read into as a young kid. So I called this album The Story of Jim Thorpe because it's somewhat of a biographical album about him that I was inspired to create in order to help share his legacy with the next generations of youth growing up, as well as with the wider audience and the public who are just not aware of him.
And what do you want our youth to learn about Jim Thorpe's legacy?
Just his greatness, Olympic gold medalist, ballroom dance champion, just very physically talented, gifted person, NFL Hall of Famer. He was just very accomplished. And not only that, but he was also for our people. He would advocate for Indigenous actors to be represented in their own roles rather than, having white men playing natives and things like that. So he would advocate for, us and other people of color, and he was just a good person.
And how do you hope to inspire the youth, sort of through the album? I know we had sort of touched on it, but, what specifically about the album do you hope to share with the youth?
I hope to share his story as well as a bit of mine. There's some correlations between us, learning a bit about a little bit about his history, such as, struggles with alcohol, things like that. I've been through some of those similar things. So I hope that the youth are able to see themselves in their communities in this album and in Jim Thorpe's legacy, and understand that, we can make mistakes in life and we can still overcome them. For instance, I'm 13 years sober now, college graduate, made the dean's list 3 times, raising a young, bright son who's turning into a good young man. I call him Small Paul, but I just hope they take a lot of inspiration, and more than that, discipline out of this album and hearing it, understanding, what it takes to be successful at what you want to do in life.
Well, Tall Paul, we'll have to leave it there, but congratulations on all your accomplishments, and certainly look forward to the album.
All right, thank you.
All right, that's all we have for you on this Wednesday edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you for joining us. Miigwech, and have a great night.